In addition to those tracts coming from the primary motor cortex, we also have more subconscious control of our muscles. So that corticospinal tract is really the conscious control where we decide to make a movement and we do. The brain regions I'm going to show here are involved in more subconscious movements that occur without our fine-tuning our motor movements, our movements based on sensory input. So proprioceptors, for example, such as the muscle spindles of your legs that are stretched, might input to adjust these pathways. So first of all, the regions we're going to look at here, you should be able to label several regions here. Here is our motor cortex, our primary motor cortex. Actually, I think I have these pop up. Let's try that. Motor cortex. Yes. Basal nuclei, deep in there. The cerebellar nuclei of our cerebellum, of course, and the medulla oblongata. Now, those ones are all fairly familiar. Oh, one more, midbrain. And there's a couple structures within these structures that you've heard of. So for example, what might this red nucleus be in the midbrain? Well, it's the red nucleus. So this is going to be the nucleus that controls the lateral pathway, which is also called the Rubrospinal Pathway. Rubro refers to red. I like Rubro, the specifics, Rubrospinal, because it tells you this begins in the red nucleus, Rubro, and goes to the spinal. That tells you it's a motor pathway. So the red nucleus is going to have neurons that synapse where? In the anterior horn of the spinal cord. For this one, it's actually primarily the cervical spinal cord. Okay, the other structures here that you may be familiar, they look a little different here. We've got the superior and inferior colliculi. Then two more that I don't think I mentioned before. The reticular formation and the vestibular nucleus are both part of the medulla oblongata. These make up the medial pathway. They all actually have separate names as well that I may introduce. So all of these pathways are necessary for fine-tuning movements. The basal nuclei are also going to feed into these to control regions of the brainstem, these regions of the brainstem as well. Let's look at what happens when what these nuclei do. These nuclei are located in the brain, and then their axons are going to travel down in the spinal cord. There's no synapse before that. So these are, again, the tracts that you saw before. I showed it in a previous picture. And we really just want to look at the descending tracts right now, right? Because we're looking at motor information. So that is the ones shown in red are the descending. And I've already talked about one of those, right? Which is the corticospinal tracts. So we've got over here, oops, over here, this is our corticospinal, the lateral. Here, this is our rubrospinal. What does that mean, this is our rubrospinal again? That means these are the myelinated axons of the neurons whose cell bodies are in the red nucleus. These are the pathways. Then we've got a few others up here. We've got the reticulospinal. Where does the reticulospinal originate from, do you think? The reticular nucleus. the vestibulospinal, and the tectospinal. These originate from the primary motor cortex, of course, the red nucleus. So the red nucleus is the axons travel through the rubrospinal. This is, again, our medial pathway. Then we've got our vestibular nucleus, the vestibulospinal pathway is related to that. Then we've got our reticular formation, reticulospinal pathway, and lastly, our superior and inferior colliculi, which you will see in your sheep brain, travel through the tectospinal tract. I'm going to show you one of these pathways. I'm sorry, one last thing. These last three then, I have it right here. Oh, I said that wrong before. This is your lateral pathway. These are three of the medial pathway. Sorry about that. That makes a lot more sense because this rubrospinal tract is on the lateral side. The other ones are much more medial. And that's all that means, really. So let's look at one of these as an example. Here is a diagram of the rubrospinal pathway. This is, again, the lateral pathway. The upper motor neuron is in the red nucleus. So just some labels here. You've got the cerebrum. We've got our midbrain, where the red nucleus is located. We've got the cerebellum in back there, along with, what is this? The pons in front of it. Then we've got our medulla oblongata and our spinal cord. And our upper motor neuron is going to be located in the red nucleus. The cell body is located in the red nucleus. So this one here is our upper motor neuron. And in this diagram, the lower motor neuron is not a different color, but you can see it right here. There is an interneuron in there, so sometimes you'll see that. But this is our lower motor neuron that is going to then, let me actually draw this all the way out here. Lower motor neuron is going to synapse onto the muscle cell at a neuromuscular junction. What I'd like you to be able to do for this, first of all, this is examples of upper and motor neurons again. Upper motor neurons, lower motor neurons are where there's an upper motor neuron in the brain and a lower motor neuron that goes from the spinal cord out the periphery. So you've seen two different examples of upper, lower motor neuron pathways. The other thing I'd like you to be able to do is this here. So describe the general features of these extrapyramidal motor pathways. Extrapyramidal means the ones outside of the pyramids. This is your medial and lateral pathways, which then the types of those are these four here. The the general features of them, right? So that would be upper motor neuron, their subconscious originate in the brainstem. That upper motor neuron is in the brainstem instead of the primary motor cortex. And draw or describe one example. So choose one of these to know is basically what I'm saying, to fit in with how you understand upper and lower motor neuron.